everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Digitalk Architects. Here with us today, we have Jared Casner. Jared, welcome to the show. Please go ahead and tell us about yourself.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on, Carolina. I am Jared Casner. I have been developing software professionally for, 25 years, more than that now. It's feels old to say that, but I've been doing this for a long time. I've spent a little bit of time in the federal government space, held some security clearances, worked under the Director of National Intelligence as a contractor. I then moved into marketing automation software, and that was my first startup. And then I've kind of been at startups in Silicon Valley ever since. I worked at an AI company before AI was cool back in 2012 to 2015. And then since then, I've been head of engineering, CTO at health tech and fintech companies for about 10 years before stepping out on my own about 3 years ago to start Blacksmith InfoSec.
Very good. Okay, so on that note, you went from working at, big companies, software development, cybersecurity. What was the moment where you realized that you needed to take the leap from employee to entrepreneur and, start a new company?
Yeah. I don't know that there was necessarily any one particular moment in time, although there was a whole lot of little things that kind of added up to get to a moment in time. And there was, so again, about 3 years ago, my co-founder and I were both 20 plus year careers, both looking for work at the same time in our careers. It was the first time in our 20 plus years where we were both looking for work at the same time. And we were both going through interview processes and realizing a few different things. Number one, the things that we were going to be asked to do on day one at the new companies was basically the same things that we had been doing at the last 5 companies that we had each worked at, right? Stand up a security program from scratch. In my case, build out the engineering and software side of things. In his case, build out the IT and infrastructure side of things, right? So there's a lot of the same tasks and things that we were being asked to do. And so we started looking around and saying, you know what, why are we having to do the same thing? It feels like reinventing the wheel every time we start a new job. And so why don't we write some software so that when we start that next job, we are in a better place? And so as we were interviewing, we were also kind of building some software along the way. We started looking at the software we were building and saying, this is actually kind of cool. I wonder what happens if we show this to a friend. And we showed it to a friend, and the friend said, hey, that's really neat. How can I buy this? Hey, maybe we should figure out how to sell some software, right? So it was almost like accidental entrepreneurship in a way. But that was sort of one piece of it, was the realizing that there was a problem that we had constantly been having to solve over and over again in our careers. Another piece of it was, interviewing sucks. I don't know when the last time you interviewed for a job was, Carolina, but it's no fun, right? And then, I'd start an interview process for a CTO position and then get a rejection letter a week later about a director position for that company, and realizing that the company had misleveled the position that they wanted to hire for and thought they wanted a CTO, but they really wanted a director of engineering or vice versa. And so you'd see these weird things where companies just didn't, especially at startups, they don't really know what they want. And then at the same time, it was also kind of at the start of the AI era where, ChatGPT had just been released, 6 months before that. And so there was a lot of like, can we do this with AI? Can we not do this with AI? What is that going to look like? And so it's a whole lot of different things that kind of all added up together to say, you know what, I'm tired of working with bozos that don't really know how to run a business. Maybe I should be the bozo that somebody else is working for, that they can say, why would you do that? So let me be in their shoes for a little bit and kind of get that experience. So that was,
And for the record, I'm not
a
far.
lot of different things.
Not to, it's funny you say that, because I think that's kind of has been my experience too. Like, I have done a lot of interviewing for hiring, but I've also interviewed quite a few candidates, and I'm going to say the process is broken.
Yeah, horribly.
But
Horribly broken.
like going for interviews is probably one of the most dreadful things you have to do when you have to do it. And it is just one of those, and you are right. Many times they don't even know what they're hiring for or what they want. But I think also I had this conversation not long ago with an HR person. It's like because HR in hiring, it's sort of like a numbers game, right? And it's not necessarily the best person for the job. It is so subjective to perception, right? So if the perception of the hiring person, the perception of you, of the hiring person, it's in any way, shape, or form skewed by something, then you're done, right?
Yep.
Even if you are the best candidate for the position, with the best qualification. And sometimes the other part to that is like, it doesn't matter if you have the best qualifications or, again, same thing, you might not end up getting the job because the perception wasn't ideal. And
Yep.
in many cases, they don't, it is not the best person for the job that gets the job. So it is, interviewing for a position and interviewing people for that position are two very difficult things to do.
Yeah. It is a completely different skill set to interview than it is to do the job. You're exactly right.
Agree.
The
Yeah.
things that we need, the things that we need to be good at for the interview process, resume writing, interviewing, putting the best foot forward, being able to create a good first impression and a great impression in the 30-minute interview window is very different than the ability to do the job. And I,
Hmm.
and especially right now where AI is so prevalent in the resume writing process and the job application process, and even in the interview process itself of like, it's, I don't envy anybody who's interviewing for a job right now. It's hard. It's hard. It's really hard
It is hard.
and it's no fun. So yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. So that's a completely
Yeah.
different
Well, I'll say
conversation,
we can talk for
and
the
it
next
is.
45 minutes if you want to. But
Yeah, we can go on that one for a long time because like there is no right or wrong answer, but it is a complicated conversation.
yes.
But jumping back into, why we're here, you often say your biggest competitor is in another cyber security company. It's Inertia. Why do so many business owners still believe cybersecurity and compliance are problems for someone else?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of different things that go into this, right? There's the I'm so small, nobody will attack me. And in some ways you're completely right. If you're so super small, you will not be a target. But you're right for the wrong reason. It's not that somebody is specifically targeting you and saying, "Carolina, I'm going after you personally," right? And maybe you've done something and your social media views are making you a target and putting a target on your back. But almost certainly they are not actively going out and targeting you. What they're doing is they're scanning the entirety of the internet and they find an IP address. And that IP address happens to have a vulnerability and they say, I'm going to go after that vulnerability. They don't care about you. They don't care about your data. They don't care about who owns that IP address. They say, I can get in. Let me see what's there. Now, and then what they're betting is that you care about your data, right? So if they're able to get in and they're able to attack you and they're able to put a ransomware on your system or phish your employees and extort them for money or whatever the case may be, it's a numbers game. And so you're absolutely right that they do not care about you, but you're right for the wrong reasons because they don't care they don't care if you pay the ransom. They don't care if you pay the extortion. They don't care about any of that. It's a numbers game. If you pay, great. They made a little bit of money and they move on with their lives. If you don't pay, they don't care that you don't get your data back. Again, they're going to move on with their lives. To them, it's just a job. Their job is to just go out and find as many vulnerabilities as they can, attack those vulnerabilities, and they don't care who you are. And so a lot of companies are getting that piece of the equation right, that they're too small for anybody to care about them. And so as a result, they don't make any progress. They don't think about this. And you'll see this both in the cybersecurity realm. And then where I focus a little bit more is on the compliance side of things. Your corner doctor's office, like your family physician, probably does not care that, like, they might say they care about HIPAA compliance, but they're probably not doing all the things that they need to be doing to comply with HIPAA. Why? HIPAA has no teeth. Unless you are actively under attack, there's no government body that's coming in and auditing you and checking to see whether you're HIPAA compliant or not. What they do is come in after the fact when when you've already had a really bad day and say, "Oh, hey, you've already been hacked. You've already had all your data breached. Now we're going to fine you for all that data that was lost." Well, I mean, I might already be out of business because I've already had everything that, like, all of the sensitive information has already been lost. And I've had to tell all my patients, hey, I leaked all of your sensitive medical information. Like, I might have to go out of business anyhow. What do I care if I get fined? At that point, like, the fine is meaningless. But we need, right? So there's pieces of this that we kind of have the sequence of events backwards. And so, yeah, a lot of people just don't care. And they'll take the ostrich approach where they just stick their head in the sand and hope for the best. And technically, that is a plan. Not caring is a plan. Your incident response plan might be, oh my God, panic. And that technically, that's a plan. It's not a good plan, but it's a plan, right? So, we have to think
Yeah.
about part of my job is helping people understand that there are risks. Now, I don't want to go out there and be a boogeyman either, right? Just because you can get hacked doesn't mean you will get hacked, right? And so I don't want to go out there and scare everybody and say, oh, you're going to get fined, you're going to get hacked, these like bad things are going to happen. But what I really want to do is almost have you heard the old joke? And this is maybe an imperfect analogy, but the old joke of two guys are out in the woods and they come across a bear. And one of them bends down and starts tying his shoes. And the other guy says, hey, look, you know you can't outrun that bear. And the first guy says, I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun you. The same thing is kind of
It's
true in
true.
cybersecurity, right? Like, I don't need to be faster than the attackers. I need to be faster than I don't need to be more secure than, or perfectly secure, but I need to be as more secure than the people around me, than the other IP addresses that are out there on the internet. I need to be taking care of the low hanging fruit and doing the right things. But then more importantly, I need to think about this a little bit like an investment, right? If you think about this a little bit like your 401k or your IRA, if you do your investment retirement, like wait to do your retirement savings until you're 60 years old, you're going to be putting every penny you can possibly put into your retirement account so that you can retire at a reasonable age. Same thing
Hmm.
is true. Wait for a client to come along and say, we need to have a SOC 2 attestation before we'll sign a contract with you. The government, we have CMMC coming very quickly here. If you're waiting until, there's a deadline coming in November, I better do something about it right now. Guess what? You're going to be putting a lot of money into getting compliant very quickly because there's a whole bunch of stuff that you haven't been doing. And then you're also going to be burning out your employees. On the other hand, if you look at your business and say, I want to do the right things, I want to start becoming more secure and more compliant on day one, the job becomes easier. The total cost of ownership becomes way lower, right? And so that's a big part of what I'm trying to do is educate people that if you start early and do small investments early and frequently in your business, you will develop the right habits. When the new approaches come out, you'll already be prepared so that you can move your business along safely and securely and minimize the risk profile that you have while also being able to grow your business. You can have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, and it's something you said earlier kind of brings me to my next point, which is a lot of it's built in the fear, right? Like it's usually fear-based selling from the providers. Like you're gonna get hacked, or are you waiting for the next ransomware, or whatever the case might be. How can businesses create stronger relationships with their clients and their cybersecurity and IT departments, with trust instead of fear? Like, because it's constantly like, and the worst part of it is, as much fear as you put into it, it doesn't break the procrastination of having to go and and do it, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, people buy on emotion, right? And fear is an emotion. And so if you can scare somebody, they might buy something. Now, are they going to do something with like, oh, hey, I bought this thing, so now it's a solved problem, and I don't need to be afraid of it anymore. So that's one mindset, and so that's one reason why fear is not a great way to be selling. The second thing is just because I've sold you on fear does not mean I've actually built any trust or rapport with you. What I've done is set you up so the next time somebody can tell a better scary story than I can tell, you're going to drop me and go to my competitor. Right? Instead, what I want to be doing, and I'm sure you run into this all the time in your business, Carolina, right? It's about storytelling and understanding that there is a value in partnership and working together, that you're out there for their business. And so if you are thinking about cybersecurity, compliance, really any services for that matter, don't try to sell them what you have. Understand what they need and show them that you have what they need and sell them that, right? So understanding the needs of your clients. If I go into a restaurant and I try to sell them on some event management platform that's going to take all of their data and aggregate it into one place, the restaurant's going to say, why do I need this? And they're not going to be wrong. Well, but let me tell you what they care about is, do I have cameras on my exterior so people aren't breaking in? What am I doing to make sure that I'm not losing inventory because my bartenders are giving out free shots to customers? What happens if my internet goes down? Can I still take a credit card payment when I at the end of the night from my bar manager? Right? Those are things
Hmm.
that they care about from a security. So ask your clients, what do you care about? What are your initiatives like? What are you trying to do over the next 3 months? Oh, you're adding a new store? Awesome. Let me talk to you about how we can secure that facility as you're building it out. So I'm going to help you achieve your business goals, but also reduce the risk that you have along the way, right? So it's understanding the needs and the wants and the aspirations of your clients, the things that keep them up at night, and use that to sell what you have, as opposed to telling them, hey, you have a headache that you don't even know about. Let me scare you into buying something. Like, that's not the way to win trust and maintain it. They want somebody who's going to be there and the long-term partner for their business.
Yeah. So on that note, from your point of view, and again, you focus on selling security and compliance, right? What are some of the biggest mistakes you see MSPs and IT providers and cybersecurity firms make when trying to communicate the value of compliance to their clients?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the biggest one is I already talked about, which is they try to sell what they have instead of understanding what their clients need, and right. And so, okay, one of the fun things about starting your own business, and I'm going to do a quick digression. I'll come back, I promise.
All right.
My background is not in sales. My background is in technology. I am a technologist at heart. I have been building software and like hands on the keyboard writing code and managing software developers my whole career. My co-founder is kind of in the same boat. He's less of a coder, but more on the traditional IT and cybersecurity side of things. Neither one of us has ever sold before. And so one of the things that we had to figure out and what really held us back early on was that we kept trying to tell people all the things that we had. Let me show you what we have. Let me do a feature dump. Let me show you the platform. That doesn't sell software. What sells software is building trust, understanding the needs of the clients, asking questions. And so, there's a lot of really great resources out there about how to sell. We wrote a book about it that we published on Amazon, specifically around cybersecurity and compliance. But the reality is, if you're not in there asking questions and doing discovery and understanding the needs of your clients or your prospects, you're never going to be able to sell them anything because you're just doing a feature dump. And that makes it really hard to overcome that. It's okay, great. You have all these things, but like, why? Why do I care? Showing them the value and understanding what pain points your clients have and showing them how you're solving those problems matters much more than whether you have feature A, B, or C. It's how does feature A relate to the problem that they have and can that solve their problem? That's honestly the biggest one is really just spend time asking questions, understand what your clients need.
Yeah. You know what?
That was a deep dive.
Well, you know what? I was thinking because in IT and in SaaS, that is such a it's such a thing that a lot of the people building the companies are developers and technical people, but they don't have ever done the selling, right? So they've solved the problem. And again, I had this conversation maybe a couple months ago during another podcast episode, talking to a guy that, he has a video business and he's very focused on how business owners create and do their storytelling. And because he's in video, the storytelling is such an important part, right? And one of the biggest things that he was talking to me about was like how business owners and technology people especially, they know the product, they understand their product, but they almost always fail to relate to their audience. So they're always talking about what they like, what they did it. It's I instead of why they should like it or they should use it or how it's solving their problem. And you just kind of hit that point and made it reminded me of that conversation because it's such a thing, especially in technology, right?
Well, yeah, and especially to your point about technologists, like we like to talk in bits and bytes and ones and zeros, and like we use language sometimes that is completely archaic or Byzantine or like super focused on our domain. And what we don't do is a great job of relating that to your business, right? And so if we can find ways of talking about how what we are doing relates to your business and use your language that you understand, then we will be much more effective also, right? If I talk to, again, you pick on restaurants, if I talk to restaurants or doctors or lawyers about firewalls and firewall configuration, they're going to get a very blank stare on their face very quickly. Their eyes will glaze over and I'll lose them completely. If I instead talk about,
100%.
oh, hey, law firm, do you want to have all your case files released like what happened in the Panama Papers? No? Okay, well, here are some ways that we're going to solve that particular problem from you so you're not leaking customer data. Medical office, do you want to have your patient records released? No? Like, here's how we're going to do that. Medical office is a great example also. So one of the things that the government requires is that doctors maintain records for 7 years.
7 years,
All their
yeah.
medical records have to be retained for 7 years. Well, what happens if you lose that data sooner, right? If there's records that get destroyed because your hosting provider goes out of business, or records that get destroyed because somebody comes in and ransomwares you, right? Is it acceptable for you to lose any of that patient data? No. Okay. Well, let's talk about the backup strategy to make sure that if your primary storage goes down for whatever, hard disks fail, right? So let's talk about what we do if we lose that primary storage. Where do we restore that from so you can maintain the 7 years that you need to keep? Lawyers are the same thing. We need to keep data for 7 years. Right? So how do we do that? Well, we ensure that through backups. But if you start with all right, we're going to back up your data for 7 years. Well, wait, why? Why are you doing that? You're going to charge me how much to store it for 7 years? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But if you instead start from let me talk to you about the things that you care about and the reasons why and the problems that we're solving in your language, it makes the conversation go a lot more easily.
Yeah. On that note, and we're talking about it, we're looking at, small, medium-sized business owners. So you're talking to the lawyers, to, the restaurant owners, all of them. What do you think are the most common misconceptions they have about cybersecurity risk, and what do you think they should do or think different on those misconceptions?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about a little bit of this earlier. It's the "I'm too small to be attacked," right? So that's probably one of the
That's a
biggest
big one.
misconceptions. Yep, which is a big one.
Yes.
The other piece is that all businesses are created equal, right? They're not. The risk to your business as a marketing agency, the risk to my business as a cybersecurity firm, the risk to a restaurant, to a law firm, to a medical practice, the risks to all these businesses are very different. The way they store their records, right? If the medical practice is still living in, I will jokingly call it the dark ages, where they're not using an electronic medical record, but they're still using paper files for everything, they have a very different set of risks than somebody who's using an electronic medical record. If somebody's using Epic versus something that their cousin vibe coded for them, like they're going to have different risk profiles. And so understanding the risk to your business and really like honestly asking yourself the questions about what's keeping me up at night will make you a much more informed decision about what things you need to protect. And this is where, again, having a professional who can come in and ask some of those questions for you. What happens if your website goes down? Well, if you're a mom and pop ice cream shop, you probably don't care whether your website goes down for a day or a week or a month even, because it's not driving most of the traffic. It's just a thing that you feel like you have to have. If you're an e-commerce site and your website goes down, every minute that it's down means a potential lost sale, right? And so the understanding the risk profiles and where things go is like, that's a big piece of what really every small business owner needs to think about is what are the things that actually matter? And you're probably, as a small business owner, you're thinking about the things that are sort of in your wheelhouse. What if I can't make payroll? What if I don't get that client? What if whatever, right? You're thinking about the business side of it. You're not necessarily thinking about the technology side of it. And what we have to understand is that business and technology is a portion of the business, and especially for those of us who are completely online, technology might be the business. And so we think about asking those questions a little bit differently, and that will tell us what our risk profile is, and based on the risk profile, how much we're willing to spend to minimize that risk profile and give ourselves, my t-shirt today, good security is like an onion, it has layers. Like, what layers are we going to put into place from our cybersecurity standpoint to keep ourselves safe and secure?
Beautiful. All right. Let's go back a little bit to, you and your partner started this cybersecurity firm, Blacksmith, during the early stages of AI as we know it today.
Yep.
That's the kind of the point, because AI has been around for a while, but as we know it today, we could say kind of like the parting point is ChatGPT, right? The introduction of ChatGPT to the world. How has AI changed the cybersecurity landscape, both for defenders and for attackers, from your point of view?
Yeah. It has completely changed it and done nothing at the same time. And I appreciate that as a contradiction in terms, and I actually mean that very honestly here, right? So the things that AI is finding, it is finding at a scale and a speed that are really unprecedented. So both from an attacker and a defender side of things, right, where we're finding vulnerabilities faster as attackers and as defenders, and how we're able to respond to those things. At the same time, it's not like it really has invented a new category of attack or a new set of attacks. There's quasi new attack surface in the sense that AI is now potentially an attack surface itself. But the reality is things really have not changed all that much. It's just the velocity that has changed.
It reminds me of something you said to me when we first met. You said AI is making us do stupid things faster.
Yeah. Yeah. It's again, AI has not really changed our ability to do stupid things. It hasn't changed our ability to do smart things. It has made us go, those of us who are using it intelligently are doing intelligent things faster. Those of us who are using it to
Definitely.
do less intelligent things are doing less intelligent things really fast too. I heard a speaker talk about this not 3 months ago, maybe, where basically, if you think about process as your engine, like the things that you are doing on a daily basis, that's your engine. AI is the turbo that goes on top of that. And so if you haven't defined what your process is, you're just throwing AI in to do things faster. It's like throwing a turbo onto a tricycle where like there's no controls. You're going to be pedaling really fast. You might go into a wall. You might fall over. It's maybe not the best way of doing things. And I think one of the things that AI is really good at is how do I want to phrase this? AI is so good that it makes us believe that it's better than it actually is. right? And
It's
so
true,
AI is so
actually.
good at if I get a contract, and this is something that actually drove me absolutely bonkers the other day. I got an NDA from a client that said that they wanted me to sign, and I had to click through like 7 different prompts in DocuSign to say no, I don't want the AI summary of this because I wanted to actually read the contract. And AI is there's a lot of things where AI is really good at reading a contract and summarizing it for you. It doesn't always find everything, but it's 90% of the time it's going to get it
That's a
90%
decent
correct.
point. Yeah.
It gets you most of the way there, and it's a helpful addition, but it cannot be a replacement. And so, like,
Right.
you have to be reading your contracts. And it's to that same vein, like, I won't use AI to write a contract for me. I'll hire a lawyer. Now, I might have AI review the contract and tell me when somebody sends it to me and say, "Hey, I've read it myself, but is there anything else that I'm missing in this that I should be paying attention to?" Or ask my lawyer to review specifically, and that way I can reduce the amount of hours I'm spending with my lawyer because guess what? Lawyers are expensive, right? So
Yeah.
I don't want to spend 10 hours with my lawyer if I can spend 5 hours with my lawyer.
I
I
agree.
heard a great
So you can
say
do
that,
like a draft. So you can use it for like a draft starting point, but it shouldn't
yep,
be the whole thing. It did,
yep,
and I agree with you. Again, going back to every time I have this conversation, it shouldn't be doing everything. It should be a starting point or support point. But then again, you still have to go through the motions, right?
yep,
Of your own voice in your example, lawyers. It's a big deal. And
yep,
and again, it also depends on the level of complexity of the task, right? Like if all
correct.
you're doing is a quick, NDA that's just to cover your but if it's like big company at an enterprise level where you don't want that. You want to really cover everything,
Yeah,
right? If it's you and me for whatever reason, that's valid, but again, it just case by case, and it definitely doesn't solve everything.
well, and there's a little bit of I think all of us have used AI and found where it has not gotten things exactly right, and that's primarily true in the domains that we know really well, right? So I use AI to write software every day, and it has made
Uh-huh.
me insanely productive. I can get out so much more code every week than I used to be able to do. However,
100%.
I also find bugs that it makes constantly. There's always something that it's not exactly the way I want it to be done. And I have to constantly be adjusting and addressing it and writing my own code and fixing things up. And the problem is if let's say it's writing marketing copy for me, for example, I don't have a background in marketing. I can generate a draft blog post and maybe it's good enough as it is to your point. What's the downside if it's wrong? Like, okay, maybe I get a little bit of egg on my face if my blog post is not correct. If I'm advertising a new product or a new feature and I want to have that exactly right and I want to make sure I'm not getting in trouble with false advertising laws and things like that, I'm probably going to have a marketing professional come in and just take a look at it and make sure that I'm not getting myself into trouble, right? There's because I
Yeah.
don't know enough about that, and it's the same thing that's true for a legal document. If the legal document, to your point, is a very simple NDA, like a 1-page NDA, yeah, maybe there's no big deal in having the AI summarize it and tell me there's nothing wrong with it. If it's creating my MSA for my master services agreement for my company, and it's every dollar of revenue is going to be tied to that document, I want to make sure that's buttoned up pretty tightly, and I'm gonna be willing to pay a lawyer to take it from 80% that or 90% or 95% that AI got me to the rest of the way, and it's going to be money well spent, right? And so I just need to understand the risk of what the outputs are.
On the note of, I mean, you've been in writing software, for quite some time, 20
Yeah,
plus years.
longer than I want. I sorry, I'm gonna quick digress
You
here.
look younger than that, but hey,
I went back and gave a guest lecture at my university 2 weeks ago, and
okay.
I realized as I was talking first of all, I've been writing software longer than any of those, and I say kids now. First of all, when did I start calling 21, 22-year-olds kids? Like that was
That was
my
the
first,
the
and then the second one was realizing I've been out of college longer than these kids have been alive. Like I graduated, but long before they were even born. So I'm like, oh, man, they weren't even alive during 9/11. It's like, how did
that's
this happen?
crazy.
How did I get to have life experiences that didn't even happen in their lifetime? So
I know,
anyhow,
that's
sorry.
crazy. So no, it's okay because it does make you go, whoa, holy crap. How do you personally decide how and when AI is helping productivity versus when it's creating risk or lowering quality in your line of work?
Yeah. So the way I talk about AI is two things have to be true in order for AI to be a success factor for you. The first piece is you have to think about the inputs, right? So understanding the prompt, understanding the data that's going into it. How are you feeding the AI with what you want to have? And then the second piece of it is you have to reason about the outputs. You have to look at what it comes up with and actually think through what that looks like. In my case, in code, one of the most important things for me is code is one of those things where it's write once, read many times.
Yep.
Meaning, I'm going to write it today, and I'm probably not going to touch that code for 6 months, but I'm going to have to read it every time I want to make sure that is this still doing exactly what I want it to do 6 months from now or a year from now when I come back to it? Do I understand what that code is doing? And so what I'm not I'm writing the code both for does it solve the problem today, but also can I understand what it's doing a year from now? And so I'm writing the code as much for future Jared as I am for solving the problem today. And so that's the biggest lens that I look through with this is future Jared going to look at this and say, oh my God, what was I thinking here? Or is future Jared going to look at this code and say, oh yeah, this makes total sense. I can follow this along. And I say future Jared and very loosely here, right? Because it's what happens when I hire an intern or a new software developer or somebody else, and they have to come in and read my code. If they can't understand what it's doing, then there's no way they're going to be able to maintain it or support it or anything else, right? And so I need to have readable, maintainable code. And so it's that reasoning about the output and understanding what it does. And if I can't describe it effectively, then there's something horribly wrong there.
If you were to, kind of give a percentage of how much of your day-to-day coding in business is being done with the help of AI, and how much is just you doing what you've always done?
Ooh, that's a good question. So AI is augmenting probably 80% of the code that I write. There's still 20% of it where it's like, all right, this is so easy that I'm just going to go and do it myself because it'll be faster for me to write the code than it will be for me to write the prompt to get it to generate the code. So it's probably better for me to just go do it myself. And when I say augment, it's not 80% of the code is being written by AI. It's that 80% of the work that I'm doing. So before you and I jumped on today, I initiated a prompt. And so that somewhere in the background, Claude is writing code for me and I'll come back and I'll spend time reviewing that code and tweaking it and making it look nice when I'm done. And so this is where the biggest area where AI has helped me out is it's like a junior developer. I can set it off to do a task and then I can have a conversation with you and I can come back to it and pick things up right where I left off. And so I'm still getting productive, and I say productive work in the sense of like writing code done while I'm doing other things. So I can almost do two jobs at once, which is great. Right. So
Just because I am extremely curious, give us an example of how you would get started with one of your prompts to to get a task going in your day to day.
yeah. So the first piece of it is describing who the audience is. So as a non-technical CFO, I need to be able to log into Blacksmith to understand. And one of the things that I'm frustrated with right now is that I see this request to do a task, like enforce multi-factor authentication, and I don't really understand what that means. And so I need to have very clear descriptive text to explain to me how this is going to go. Right. So that's the use case or the person that I'm trying to solve for. So that's the first piece is describe who I'm solving the problem for. The second piece is me as a developer saying, all right, when I hear the user make this statement, here are the things that I care about, right? I don't want to just solve this one problem in isolation. I want to be able to write something that is going to be applicable to all of the different things that user might have to do so that I can kind of create this universal help text function. And so I need to have it's going to be stored in the database. I need it to be editable by my internal users so they can edit the text along the way. I need to be able to add stuff very easily to it, right? So I'm going to describe all of the different pieces and aspects of it that I want it to be able to do. And then I'm going to say, and then on top of that, here's my style guide in my code. Here's a piece of my code that is very closely mimics what I want you to use today. And that way you can go and copy the style that I've already written this in. So again, somebody who's looking at my code now that you generate is going to be able to follow along and understand. It's a little bit like if you're writing a book, right? Here's
Yeah.
chapter 1. I want chapter 2 to follow the same writing style. If you don't provide that context for the AI, you might have chapter 1 feeling like it's written by Carolina, and chapter 2 feeling like it's written by Jared, and chapter 3 feeling like it's written by Anna, and chapter 4
Somebody
like it's by
else.
Mike. Right? If you have different voices throughout, it becomes really
Hmm.
confusing. And so if you instead say, here's a specific, like, I want this to look and feel like this other piece of code that I already have written, you're
Yeah.
going to get a much better output, right? So it's define who the audience is, define the parameters from a technology standpoint and how you want it to be built, define the style guide that you want it. And so the prompt itself might take me 20 minutes to write and make sure that I'm thinking through all the different aspects of it. And then the code will take 20 or 30 minutes for the AI to generate it. But that's code that it might have taken me 3 or 4 hours to write. And so in 45 minutes, I've got a working prototype that I can then go through. And now I can say, okay, well, I see
Debug.
what you're doing. Understand why you did it this way. I need to tweak it a little bit. And so, and again, sometimes I'll look at it and say, all right, I want you to go off and redo this section. And sometimes I'll look at it and say, all right, yeah, again, it's faster for me to rewrite this the way that I want it to, or change things up and give it what I wanted to do myself.
Very good. All right. You also host your own podcast.
Yeah.
And so but it's very different from what we do here. So tell us about your podcast and the unique approach that you take to answering real questions from MSPs and business owners every week, right? Every week?
Yeah. Every week we do a
Go ahead.
weekly episode. The podcast is called Get NIST. So NIST is the National Institute for Standards and Technology. We're nerds. And so we took a little
That's
bit
okay.
of inspiration from a cartoon called Rick and Morty. And so there was an episode of Rick and Morty where they had to sing to stave off an alien invasion that was called Get Swifty. So we took that Get Swifty mindset and turned it into Get NIST. And so anyhow, long way of introducing the name of the podcast, but it's really, how do I think about cybersecurity and compliance as a service provider or a small business? And we get questions all the time from our customers and from their customers asking, why is HIPAA important? How do I get HIPAA compliant? What does it mean to turn on multi-factor authentication? And so some of it will be very esoteric things. Some of it will be at a framework level. How do I choose between the NIST cybersecurity framework and the CIS implementation groups? Like, what's the benefits and the downsides of each one of those? And so we get kind of a broad mix of questions around cybersecurity and compliance. And because we were answering these questions so frequently, we said, you know what, this seems like a fun way for us to produce it. So we started producing the weekly podcast, and we're coming up on our first anniversary now. I think we've done 45 episodes, so we're close to our first anniversary. And it's really, most episodes are answering two questions from real users. Every once in a while, we'll get a question or a general topic that makes sense for us to bring a guest onto. And so we'll bring a guest in to talk about a specific topic. But we take a very much an educational approach to it, as how can we educate the market? And yes, we'd love it if you used our software, but this is not a sales pitch. It's not a FUD based podcast. It's really about how do we just educate and be the rising tide that lifts all boats.
Very good. How do they find the podcast and how do they find you and your company?
Yeah. So blacksmithinfosec.com is our company. Blacksmithinfosec.com/NISTY, NISTY is the podcast. So again, we'll try to make it as easy as possible for everybody. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, everywhere you find podcasts, wherever I want to look for those. And then if you have questions or that you want to have answered, that blacksmithinfosec.com/NISTY is a great place to go and ask your questions. And we'll make sure that we get those onto the podcast sometime in the near future.
Amazing. Bonus question.
All right.
What do you think will have the biggest impact on small and medium-sized businesses in the coming 3 to 5 years? AI, cybersecurity regulations, compliance requirements, or something entirely different?
I mean, we're already seeing a profound shift in the way companies do business because of AI. And so it would be naive to say really anything other than that. It's going to continue to be really a force multiplier in a lot of ways. There are companies who are making, I'll call them, very short-sighted decisions because AI is less powerful today than people believe it is or want it to be. Whether it lives up to those expectations or not, we're in June of 2026. And so, I'm guessing in the next 3 years, we're going to see a little bit of coming back to reality where AI doesn't quite live up to the hype. But at the same time, we're seeing this already, right? Where companies laid off a bunch of, let's call it, software developers, and yet they're already starting to hire back software developers because they realize that AI is not the solution for that. And I'm sure you've seen this in marketing where content, it cracks me up actually, as a little digression here, like seeing OpenAI and Anthropic and some of the frontier model companies advertising hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for content marketing writers and content writers for a company that is supposedly going to be putting all these content writers out of business, right? Like, the frontier models still believe and understand that they need to have humans powering this stuff. And so anyhow, long-winded way of saying, like, AI is absolutely the thing that is going to continue to be a force multiplier, a disruptor, and a changer of businesses. And how that exactly plays out over the next 3 years, I don't know. I think there's going to be mostly for the best, but I think we're also going to see some things that crop up that we scratch our heads and say, I don't know that I like this brave new world that we live in.
It's true. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree on all of it. You
Yeah.
know what's funny? You talk about Anthropic and OpenAI, but the one that's, you know, kind of been a shocking admission in the last couple of weeks is how a lot of these bigger enterprises are admitting that the cost of AI is not cheaper than hiring people. And now they're
Well,
saying, stop using AI for everything and go back to doing people things.
it's going to get worse, right? So if let's look at Uber as kind of the example, right? 15 years ago, Uber was the cheapest way to get around because it was so heavily subsidized by venture capital, right? Now Uber is as expensive or more expensive than a cab in most places, and
I
yet,
agree. I agree.
and so I'm in San
Actually, I
Francisco.
have an example on that. So we went on a trip up to Montreal and it was pouring rain, right? So it's pouring rain. You know how Uber works. It's rush hour, so you get the multiplier, and it's on a rainy day, so it gets extra multiply.
Yep.
So, long story short, the cost of the trip we needed, which was really short, was going to be astronomical. And I don't remember the exact number. What I do remember is that we called the cab company. It was significantly by more than half cheaper than the Uber ride. And you go like, wow, why? Right? Like, why
Yep.
am I calling Uber if I can do this, the traditional cab for more than half the price of the Uber? And,
Well,
and I think we're at that point with a lot of the AI where they're starting to realize, oh, wait, because of the consumption, it's not cheaper, right? Like you're not doing, mundane tasks here and there that you can, kind of just get away with Pro Plan. These developers are not just using the max plans. A lot of them are using API keys that are like a full, price per token, and the companies are going crazy because I don't remember the exact company or the precise example, but I think it was something along the way of they had spent their entire AI budget in the first 3 months of the year. Whatever that budget was set at, first 3 months of the year, it was already blown out of the water. So, and that
yeah.
will
Well,
continue to be a problem.
it's going to, and so you're exactly right. It's going to get worse, right? Because again, right now we are heavily subsidizing the use of AI through venture capital. Well, Anthropic has already filed for its IPO.
Hmm.
SpaceX, which owns Grok, has already filed for its IPO. OpenAI has supposedly just in the last couple of days confidentially filed for their IPO. So venture capital is going to, the amount of net new investment into these businesses, once those IPOs are done, is going to start to dry up, which means the companies are going to have to start moving towards profitability. And I forgot what the numbers is, but I think it was something like OpenAI lost $9 billion on $5 billion of revenue in 2025 or something like that. I've forgotten what the numbers are. So you'll have to fact check me on this later. But it was some like very large net loss on some very still large amount of revenue, but losses and revenues were
No
about the
balance.
same. But if your losses and your revenues are about the same, that means that there somewhere along the way your revenues are going to have to increase in order to
Yeah.
make up for those losses. And so if we just look at it and say, all right, let's assume they only double the cost of ChatGPT consumption in 2027 or 2028. Right. Again, I don't know how long it's going to take for them to burn through the cash that they're burning. Right. But like they're going to do it at some point, and investors are going to start to say, we need to see a path to profitability here because you don't have that open spigot from the venture capital community anymore. So you have to start to, if you can't subsidize, you have to pay your own way. And if you have to pay your own way, now you have to increase costs. And so again, we're already seeing, to your point, that companies are starting to pull back and say the token cost already is more than we want it to be. And so you need to start pulling back and doing stuff manually again because your time is more valuable than, or is less expensive than the cost of the tokens. Right.
Yeah.
And so, and that equation is going to continue to skew in favor of humanity over time. Now, again,
Or
theoretically, they're
they're
also
gonna have
trying
to
to
figure out a way of bringing down cost of
Right.
AI,
Well,
right? Which
yeah, or
they
the cost.
are.
Yeah.
They are.
Yep. Yep.
Some of the models coming out of China and less reputable places
Well,
than Anthropic and OpenAI are coming up with models that are far more efficient than what we have and what we're using here. And so I think that should be the path, but how these companies in the US and in the Western world figure that out, that's yet to be seen. But they should. I mean, if they're doing it over there, and those models are performing, not, I'm not going to say quite at par with Anthropic, because that would be unrealistic, but coming close. I mean, Kimi K 2.5, and the what's the other one? Can't think of it right now. I mean, there's so
Well,
many, but those are coming close to you know what? They're coming close enough that they're usable today if you don't want to pay the high fees, right? Like I used Kimi K 2.5 for a little while when I was setting up my OpenClaw agent, and it did a pretty decent job for the most part. I mean, it wasn't a significant difference for most things that I was doing, other than writing copy. But then again, copy I was doing, with the help of AI, but it was still a hands-on process. So, but for everything else, like automating tasks like, reading emails and, summarizing newsletters and that kind of stuff, those models are perfectly fine, and you don't have to absorb the high cost. There are models that are really good right now for coding that don't require a Anthropic subscription, right? That you can just
yep.
plug into your coding software, and they'll do a fairly decent job at it without having to pay the big bucks. So it is
Now,
coming. It's just
yeah,
lower
the flip side of
slow
the flip side of that
adoption
though is,
here.
do you understand where your data is going in that
The
case, right? And
data.
so
Yep.
for the open source models where you can run it locally or run it on your own infrastructure and you know where the data is staying locally, then great. Like by all means, if you're sending your software to a model in China and you don't have, you might want to think about whether the code that you are sending to China is really code that you want to be sent to China, and whether
True.
it's worth the risk.
Yeah.
That even if they have a data processing or data privacy agreement in place, like, is that good? Is that enough for you to be willing and comfortable? If you're doing a personal project, yeah, sure, probably. If you're doing something for business, maybe less so, right? And so,
Well,
just
it
again,
really
think about,
does depend on the kind of
yep,
business, right? Like if I am sending newsletters to get summarized, I don't care. They're already public. They're already out
yes,
there.
yeah,
Nobody.
100%,
So that
exactly,
is those are. But that's what I'm talking about, right? Like we're at the point where a lot of these information is already public, so you're not compromising. Now again, I agree with you. If you are using it for coding a brand new SaaS or a brand new idea, yeah, you probably think twice about going to one of those models. But the point on all of it is they have been able to make huge advances in the models and compacting them and the token usage and all that stuff. We should be able to see that coming to the models we are more comfortable with here, or,
yeah.
or otherwise something's going to have to give, either here or there. But it has to happen if they want to continue in business.
Yep. Yeah, either their costs have to go down so they can make money with the price the way it is, or their price has to go up, and it's probably going to be somewhere in between where it's both are happening.
Yep.
And then to your point, the question is, at what point do we end up like having that equation flipped sufficiently that we start rehiring people that we've been letting go? But the U.S.
Exactly.
job report came out, and we were still hiring pretty significantly. Even when you hear about the job losses, there's still a lot of hiring that's going on. And so, and I haven't dug into those numbers to understand what sectors are hiring, but at the same time, like there are still people getting jobs in the U.S. and unemployment is still pretty low. And so there's a lot of like marketing talk, I think, or talking past each other when it comes to job losses and hiring stuff.
All right, Jared, it was fun talking to you today. Thank you so much for coming out and spending the last hour with us. No.
Yeah.
See, I
Thank you
told
for
you we
having me.
weren't going to have any issues, getting through an hour of these. Thank you so much. It was very interesting and fun. We hope to see you, come back and do another episode in the near future.
Yeah, I would love that. Maybe we'll talk in a year or two and see how many of my
May-
predictions about AI were totally wrong.
We'll go back and do look back and present, look back and present.
Yeah.
Take care,
Awesome.
everyone. Thank
Thank
you
you once
again.
again.
Until we see you in the next episode.